From the moment I said yes to the day when the Orthodox priest placed the wedding crowns on our heads, anguish did not spare me. For this reason, I was literally panic-stricken at something Theo said to me one day. I have to ask my father if he agrees to my marrying you. That may seem ridiculous to some people, but for me the consent of his parents was very important. I hoped I would be allowed into his family and received with joy. In fact, Theo had admitted to me that his father was a man with very strict ideas about marriage. It's going to be terrible, I thought, when Theo announces to them that he wants to marry a woman old enough to be his mother. Obviously, Edith, Theo had reassured me, even if my father refuses, I shall marry you all the same. But my pleasure would have been lackluster. I would have thought for the rest of my life that I had stolen a son from his parents. I knew only too well what it was like to live without father or mother. For that reason my heart was in my boots the day Theo took me to his father's house. It was July 26, 1962. He felt the same. In fact, I said to myself, if his father refuses, I shall consider that it is a sign from the gods. It will mean that I no longer deserve happiness. We went by car to La Frette, where his parents live. During the drive, Theo and I did not exchange a single word. He held my hand in his. He smiled at me, but he was anxious. Eventually, we arrived. In the small drawing room were his mother, his father, and his two younger sisters, Christy and Kathy. They all smiled at me, but we were all terribly tense. It was Kathy who broke the ice. She suddenly stood up and put on a record. Twist music. Christy asked me if I knew how to dance it. I said I didn't. Then the two girls replied, "Come on, we'll teach you." And there I was, in the middle of the drawing room, twisting like a teenager with those two young girls. All at once, I saw Theo go out into the garden with his mother and father. I thought, that's it. It's happening now. I shivered with fright. I wanted to run away. But the record went on playing, blaring out pop music. Through the window I could see Theo in discussion with his parents. It seemed to me that time was standing still, and they all looked so serious. I thought that Monsieur Lamboucas was not in agreement. I would hardly have been surprised. Finally they all came back in, their heads lowered, walking slowly. I was convinced that things were not going well, and tears came to my eyes. When they were back in the drawing room, Monsieur Lamboucas looked at me in silence for a long moment. Then he spoke to me. "Theo has asked me for permission to marry you," he said. "He is a respectful son, but he's free and he's old enough to know what he's doing. That is no concern of mine. Now, all the same, I'd like you to know I am very happy to receive you into my family." I made a great effort to force back my tears. Then Theo's mother, who is 8 months younger than I am, spoke to me. "Edith, call me maman." It was too much. I began to cry. Once the emotional scene was over, we had a cheerful dinner. People for whom family life is normal, everyday life, will probably find it hard to understand the extent of my happiness. For the first time in my existence, I was sitting in the midst of a father, a mother, 2 sisters, and my future husband. I forgot my age. I'd become once more that little girl who had dreamed day after day about this uneventful happiness. I was overwhelmed, too, by the affection which this father and mother felt for their son. Until then, I had not been sure that maternal and paternal love really existed. When Monsieur Lamboucas took me aside to express his anxiety about Theo and his career, I had to face the facts. This man had worked all his life for his wife and children. He had hoped that Theo would succeed him as director of his hairdressing salon, and Theo was now taking up a crowded and uncertain profession, that of a singer. But I've never wanted to stop him from trying his luck. Only you can tell him if he has talent or not, he told me. And the affection Theo's mother showed. How could I fail to be moved to tears as I saw her, I, who had been abandoned as a baby, 2 months old. Our home is yours now, she told me. Before I left, Maman gave me a large packet. Apricots and peaches gathered in her garden. The finest jewels in the world could not have given me as much pleasure as this humble fruit. From that day I spent all my Sundays at La Frette with Theo. After lunch, Maman Lamboucasse and I would sit on a divan, and while she knitted, I would do embroidery or tapestry work. She never stopped talking to me about her Theo. She told me about the games and silly jokes he had played when he was little. She told me about the 19 months he had spent in Algeria, whence he returned thinner by 25 pounds. On the day of our engagement, which we celebrated at La Frette, we fixed the date of our wedding, October 9th. My future mother-in-law began to cry, and I misunderstood the reason for her tears. I asked her outright, "Are you upset by the difference in age between Theo and me? Be frank with me." She looked at me affectionately. "You can make a very happy couple," she said. "Obviously my Theo is still an overgrown boy. He's boisterous and rowdy, but I know that he loves you with all his heart. Age doesn't affect that at all. You'll see, Edith. You will complete each other." His sisters also behaved towards me in an adorable way. I knew that this marriage would earn me jeers and insults, that perhaps even my public would desert me, in which case I would be ruined. But in the end, everyone seemed pleased at the idea of the marriage. In spite of that, my anxiety increased as I saw the date of the wedding come gradually closer. I was obsessed by those two figures, 47, 27, my age, Theo's age, 47, 27. Time went by. The day of the civil ceremony dawned. In 2 hours I would be appearing on Theo's arm before the registrar in order to sign the marriage register. Theo had just done my hair, and I was about to fix my makeup. I had already put on my black silk dress. I was sitting in front of my mirror. It was then that I burst into tears. I felt desperate. I threw myself on my bed. Theo came to me at once. "What's the matter?" he stammered. "No," I muttered. "I can't marry you. It's madness. It's painful for you today, but later you'll thank me." He was disconcerted. He thought I had gone crazy. "But why? Why?" he repeated mechanically. Then I turned towards him, my ravaged face wet with tears. "Look at me," I screamed. "I'm a wreck. Not a woman. Just a poor wretch who can't even stand up. You can't marry someone like that." I told him the truth about the week I'd just lived through, a week of horrible suffering that I had jealously concealed from him. It had all begun during the night of October 3rd to the 4th. I had woken up screaming with pain. I felt as if my right wrist and my feet were being crushed. It was a new attack of rheumatoid arthritis. Despite my pain, I had not wanted to wake Theo. I let him sleep in peace in his room at the other end of the apartment. I didn't want to worry him. I got up and telephoned my doctor. I begged him to come at once. I had reached the end of my physical and mental endurance. When he rang my doorbell, a few moments later, I dragged myself there and opened the door myself, but I nearly fainted into his arms. The effort had been so painful. After a rapid examination, he gave me a strong dose of cortisone to ease my pain, and then a sleeping pill. He waited there for an hour until I was asleep. The next day I said nothing to Theo. Although I was exhausted, I sang that evening at the Olympia with him. As soon as I came home, I went to bed. The pain returned, piercing my body. Rheumatoid arthritis is a horrible thing, but I still wanted to get married. 2 days later, thank God, my rheumatic attack was over. It was 3 days before the ceremony. I felt my strength returning, but I had not yet come to the end of my problems. In fact, that day, I don't know where or how, I caught a chill. All night I shivered, and when I tried to get up, I collapsed on the floor. Then I really had to call Theo to help me. He was terribly upset. "What's the matter, Edith? What happened?" I tried to cheat again. I told him that it was nothing, that I just had a cold and there was no need to make it into a drama. I insisted to my doctor that he must hide the truth from Theo. Oh, poor doctor. He was in a quandary. He didn't dare argue with me, but neither was he very pleased that nobody was keeping an eye on me. In any case, he insisted that I should stay at home in bed until my wedding, otherwise he would take no responsibility for anything. But I've always believed that an ill weed grows apace. The next evening, instead of staying in the warm, I had myself driven to the Olympia, and I sang. Theo's presence galvanized me, but I came back to the apartment in a pitiful state. I had to be supported. I couldn't walk. I couldn't talk. I was shivering. I felt feverish and frozen at the same time. When at last I had been put to bed, I became delirious, or so I learned later. Those were the memories that came back to me 2 hours before I was due to become Madame Lambucas. One last time I reproached myself. It's true we love each other, but my life now is hanging by a thread. Isn't it totally wrong to attach to myself this young man who has all his life in front of him, who's healthy and strong? I'm afraid I can't make you happy, I told him. Everything's against us. He interrupted me. He had taken me by the shoulders, and his voice was hard. I want to marry you. I want you to bear my name. If you're afraid of not making me happy, I'm afraid of losing you. I don't want you to think about your health any longer, apart from deciding to look after yourself properly at last. I'll look after you. It's the role of a husband to be there when his wife's ill. You say your health is fragile. I know. So what? Weren't you ill when I told you I loved you? Everyone had abandoned you, apart from the few friends who remained faithful, those who've stayed by you. I was disgusted when so many of them disappeared. That's how I realized I loved you, that I wanted you to be happy. Theo was launched. He wouldn't let me argue. You don't want to let me waste my time because I'm young. I've spent enough time staying out all night. At 27, it's time I started enriching my life, time that I dedicated myself to someone. I want that someone to be you. If any woman, even a young woman, even someone bursting with health, is capable of resisting a declaration like that, then I no longer know anything about women, about life, and most of all about love. I didn't cry any more, but within myself I asked to be forgiven. You don't deserve this, I repeated to myself. You've ruined so many chances of happiness, destroyed so many lives, starting with your own. But Theo knew that he had already won the battle. He had recovered that smile that I could not resist. He dried my eyes and scolded me. "Ah, I shall have to do your hair again," he said suddenly. "Be quick, they'll soon be waiting for us. We won't go away on our honeymoon tonight. We'll sing together. But as soon as we've finished our recital at the Olympia, I'll take you to Greece." After that, everything went very quickly. It had to, in fact. All my cheerful songs, I do have some, were singing within me. The doctor came. I was given vitamins and stimulants. I left on Theo's arm. In the street, I had one last dizzy spell. Those people who were waiting for me. No, they didn't whistle at me. Chanting, they called for us to appear on the balcony of the Mairie of the 16th arrondissement. Long live Edith! Long live Theo! At that moment, I stopped being afraid of the future, of what might happen to me. Through clenched teeth, I murmured for myself alone. Peut m'arriver n'importe quoi, ça m'est égal. Peut m'arriver n'importe quoi, je m'en fous pas mal. I was happy and ready for the rest of my life, even if, as in one of my songs says, je n'en connais pas la fin. That end lay not far ahead. Theo decided to send his ailing wife to the Côte d'Azur for a rest, supervised by a nurse. He took a villa at Saint-Jean-Cap-Ferrat, then a smaller one near Mougins, and finally a house in a village called Placassier near Grasse. Old friends such as Raymond Dassault came to see the convalescent. Other visitors included her songwriters, her two young sisters-in-law, and her own half-sister, Denise Gassion, with whom she had had little contact. Jean Cocteau, who was in Paris and ill himself, telephoned often. If she recovered enough to start making plans for the future, she also asked for candles, to be lit to Saint Rita, patron of lost causes. She died shortly after 1 p.m. on October 10th, 1963. Her body was transported in secret to Paris, for the star so closely associated with La Ville Lumière could not be allowed to die in an obscure provincial village. The announcement was made in Paris, and some 2 million people followed the funeral procession to Père-Lachaise. Theo Sarapo attempted to pay his wife's debts. He died in 1970 after a car accident near Limoges. In September 1981, Jacques Chirac, mayor of Paris, inaugurated the Place Edith Piaf in the 20th arrondissement, near Belleville, where she had been born.